Okay, so to explore thesis statements a little more deeply, let's look at a few sample statements and discuss how effective they would be in a persuasive paper. So, if we look at this first statement, I'd like you to take a moment and consider how would you evaluate this claim as a thesis statement? If this were your friend's thesis, what would you tell them that they did well and what could they do to improve? This statement reads, "In this paper, I'm going to write about why gun control is bad." Now, I realize you're just listening to this at home and it's not the same as in a classroom where it would stare at you until you became uncomfortable enough to answer. But I want you to really think about this. If this were your friend's thesis statement, what would you tell them that they did well and what could they do to improve? Considering our earlier points about having a controversial argument, I think we should give this writer credit for taking a position, but hopefully you've noticed that they're using first person unnecessarily. So remember, you want to avoid first person in general. In general, you should use first person only when you're illustrating a point with a personal story. Using I to share a personal anecdote is fine, but never tell the story of writing your paper. And that's what this thesis statement's doing. It's announcing the writer's plan to discuss the topic of gun control. Now, there is a convention in a few particular fields, like science and philosophy, where the writer is expected to announce their thesis this way. But unless you're writing for one of those fields, unless you're specifically asked to announce your thesis in that style, stay away from it. Avoid referencing your own paper, avoid the use of first person unless you're sharing a personal story. So use first person to tell stories, but stay away from I think, I believe, in my opinion, or while conducting research, I found this article. Using first person this way comes across as informal and sometimes just very awkward. So instead of prefacing your argument with, "This is my opinion," just assert your argument. And basically, anytime you use first person this way, you can just cross it out. So now we have gun control is bad. If we look at this thesis statement, what are its strengths and what are its weaknesses? First, I would say that this thesis is very broad and extreme. You want to be careful about making extreme arguments because they're often very easy to refute. People who make extreme arguments also do not always literally agree with their stated position. In this case, the speaker claims that gun control is bad, but this is a broad rejection of all gun regulations. If the speaker were to consider their argument more carefully, they might realize that actually, maybe some age requirements are okay. Maybe the writer wants to lower age restrictions, but very likely they would agree that small children should not possess lethal weapons. So if they agree with the idea that there should be some kind of age requirement, then the statement gun control is bad doesn't really represent their true position because they do agree that at least one regulation is good. So to have a more realistic and consistent argument, this writer needs to focus on a specific form of gun control. They don't want to ignore major holes in an extreme claim like gun control is bad. Focusing on a specific form of gun control should also help the writer generate ideas, and it will help them avoid contradicting themselves. That happens a lot when a writer starts out with an extreme thesis. So in the past, I have had students attempt to defend this claim, and what happened was that their essay lacked unity. They would start out with an extreme argument like gun control is bad, but then within their essay, they would contradict themselves and acknowledge that, yes, we should have background checks, yes, there should be age requirements. So they started out with a thesis that they didn't really agree with, that didn't represent their actual belief on gun control. If this is you, if you feel like you're starting out with an extreme claim, just ask yourself the question why. Why do you think gun control is bad? Or, what form of gun control is bad? What's a gun regulation that you don't agree with?
So the next one says, if concealed carry is allowed on college campuses, more people will legally possess guns in the classroom. So now it's more focused than gun control is bad. We have a narrowed topic, but is it an argument? Again, it reads, if concealed carry is allowed on college campuses, more people will legally possess guns in the classroom. I would say that's an observation. it's a given. If concealed carry is allowed, then having a gun in the classroom will be legal for those who have the permits. So this is just observing something is true. We can infer, well, no, not really with this example. Often I can infer what my student's view is, but this example, it could go either way. They could be in favor of that program, they could be against it. So we need an argument. And now we have law-abiding citizens should be allowed to carry concealed handguns on college campuses. So this is our strongest statement so far. Now we have an actual position on the issue. This writer supports concealed carry on college campuses. So this is the essence of a thesis. We can still develop this further. We can strengthen it. But this last part, the actual overall argument, that's the most important part of a thesis statement. What is your overall paper going to do? What are you going to persuade your readers to believe? And once you figure that out, you have the start of a thesis statement. But we're going to go further and we're going to strengthen this thesis statement. So figure out what you want to change, and then you might add a supporting argument, maybe one or two supporting arguments. And in this revision, we have one supporting argument added. We have law-abiding citizens should be allowed to carry concealed handguns on college campuses so that they can effectively defend themselves and others in the event of a shooting. So it takes a clear position, and we have a backing argument. It should be allowed for self-defense. Always keep your overall argument in the main clause. Integrate 1, 2, 3 supporting arguments. Keep your language natural. So some of you may have been instructed to start a thesis statement with this major claim and then end it with because of reasons 1, 2, and 3. I would prefer more natural language, so this one's not really listing them, but he just adds one major supporting argument. He might have others that he addresses in the paper as long as they can fit into this overall thesis, but he strengthens his thesis by adding one supporting claim. The actual thesis statement uses another strategy on top of including a supporting claim. So this is an actual student's thesis statement. I did get his permission to use this, and I believe you'll see more of his paper later in the semester. But this is his actual thesis statement, and he includes his major claim that law-abiding citizens should be allowed to carry concealed handguns. He includes that backing reason they need to do this for self-defense. But he also opens with an although clause, and you could use while or even though, it's the same strategy. He opens with this although clause so that he can appeal to his readers. This is a very effective strategy for a persuasive paper because you're trying to persuade opposing audience members. You're not just writing to people who already agree with you. You're trying to change somebody's mind. So if in this paper, this student needed to aim his argument toward people who oppose concealed carry. So he appeals to them in his thesis by acknowledging that yes, some regulations are necessary. His final thesis statement reads, although some regulations are necessary to prevent the wrong people from obtaining guns, law-abiding citizens should be allowed to carry concealed handguns on college campuses so that they can effectively defend themselves and others in the event of a shooting. So he's got his backing reason, he's got his overall argument, but he's opening with that although clause because that establishes common ground with the audience. He's not going to the extreme and saying all gun control is bad. He acknowledges that some regulations are necessary. And again, when you write your thesis statement, integrate these dependent clauses, but make sure that your overall claim is in your main independent clause. Okay, so let's look at some strategies for strengthening a thesis statement. There's other ways to write thesis statements, but this week I'd like you to try to write yours using one of these two strategies. The first one is cause and effect. And this is not a hard rule, but it tends to work better when a writer's trying to demonstrate a need for change. So if you want to establish urgency, this might be a good approach for you. But in the cause and effect, you're opening with a because clause, and in our example, we actually have a couple supporting arguments worked in here. So our example reads, because young adults tend to overindulge in alcohol when they first come of age, 18-year-olds should be allowed to consume alcohol in limited amounts so that they can develop responsible drinking habits. So the major purpose, again, is in the main clause of the sentence. We have 18-year-olds should be allowed to consume alcohol in limited amounts. And then we have two backing reasons. They're concerned with binge drinking when young adults turn 21, and they're arguing that this will help them develop responsible drinking habits. So that's the first strategy for strengthening a thesis statement. The second strategy is the greater and the lesser. So that's Aristotle's name for this argument structure. But this is the strategy that that student used earlier in his thesis statement about concealed carry. He acknowledged the merits of the opposing side, and then he asserted his own argument. So it works well because it helps you establish common ground with your opposing readers. You want to appeal to their values. So you do that by acknowledging the merits of their argument. So this one is on musical instruction in public schools. And it says, even though studying music won't directly prepare most people for work, public schools should offer musical instruction because it builds characters and strengthens brain functions that can help students learn in virtually every other subject. So the main clause is the major argument. Public schools should offer musical instruction. And they appeal to their reader by acknowledging the strengths of one of their claims. Studying music won't directly prepare most people for work. That's true. If somebody's not going to play for an orchestra, if they're not going to teach music, it's very unlikely that they're going to need music classes for that reason. So they acknowledge that the truth of that it's not going to directly prepare most people for work. However, now they assert their own argument. It should still be offered because it builds characters and strengthens brain functions. So they appeal to the opposing audience, they make their major argument, and then they also include two backing reasons in this example. They have the two reasons because it builds character and strengthens brain functions. I would encourage you to try that second strategy. It's fine if you do try the first one. Maybe try both of them and see which one you like better for your topic. But if you do choose that second strategy, I do have to warn you of one mistake my former students have made. In that opening while, although, even though clause, in that opening clause, make sure it's a point you actually agree with. My former students would sometimes write statements like, even though people disagree with me, I'm right and they're wrong. Don't write that. Don't just throw in a random statement. Make sure that it's actually relevant. So here's a mistake I get. This statement reads, although some people believe gun control is bad, background checks should be conducted before all sales, including those at gun shows, to reduce criminal offenses and to save lives. So this writer is in support of gun control, or at least in support of background checks. That opening clause is useless. It's just basically saying, although people disagree with me. And a statement like that is not going to appeal to the opposing readers. So if you want to appeal to your opposing readers, think of an argument that you actually agree with, that you actually believe is true, and integrate that. In this revision, we have, although legal restraints on the purchase of firearms cannot eliminate crime, background checks should be conducted before all sales, including those at gun shows, to reduce criminal offenses, etc. So now there's a point the writer actually agrees with. If they're writing this paper and they have a real hostile argument, their audience is going to fire back and say legal restraints won't eliminate crime. You're just going to put them in the hands of the criminals. So here they're acknowledging the merit of that statement. They're not going all the way to that extreme, but they're acknowledging that yes, it's true. Legal restraints on the purchase of firearms cannot eliminate crime. So there they're agreeing with their reader, but they're asserting their own argument to be of more importance. And that, by the way, is why it's called the greater and the lesser. The lesser is that although or even though clause. Although your argument is true, we should believe this because. So try one of these strategies when you do your homework this week. And again, it's on your own topic that you chose when you submitted that project proposal. But try one of these strategies. Have a clear change you want to be made. Make sure that you're asserting an argument and not an observation. And then try either the cause and effect approach, where you're including backing reasons, you're opening with a need for change, or try the greater and the lesser, where you're agreeing with your opponent's argument but asserting your own to be more important.